Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first Brighter Futures Conference. Many of you have joined previous sessions today. If that's you, then welcome back. My name's Phil Hazel, and I am Learning Solutions Director at Cambridge University Press. We designed this conference for senior education professionals like yourselves to experience a range of keynotes and interactive sessions, but also to share best practice in transitioning to a post-COVID education world. It's wonderful to see so many of you here today, and I'd like to wish you a very warm welcome. I'll be your host for today's session. Before we start, I just have a few technical points. If you have a question today for Ricardo or for Ale, then please place it in the Q&A box rather than the chat box, and we'll come back to those later in the session. The PowerPoint slides for today won't be shared, but we will be recording the session for you to view again after the event on our YouTube channel. If you RSVP'd to the invite for this event, then you'll automatically be sent an email this Friday, 26th of February, which will contain a personalised certificate of attendance, plus links to the session recordings. If you didn't RSVP, don't worry, you can still do this from our event webpage. So let's move on to the session itself. I am delighted to welcome today Alejandra Prado and Ricardo Morales. They will be presenting a session on implementing successful blended learning. Ale works as the Director of Languages for the Universidad del Valle de México, which is UVM, and that's a position where she focuses on constant quality improvement as well as academic administration of language programs. And one key example of that is the design of the blended undergraduate strategy program, which is something we'll be hearing about today. Ricardo is an international speaker and a teacher trainer, and for the last 10 or 20 years, he's been actively involved in digital and online education for different private language institutions, both in Mexico and wider Latin America. He's developed training modules and ESP programs for public institutions in Mexico, and right now he's the Academic Services Manager at Cambridge University Press in Mexico. So I'm particularly delighted to welcome Ale and Ricardo as speakers because the relationship with UVM and Cambridge is very long-standing. We've been working together for an amazing 14 years, and that partnership really goes from strength to strength. We've moved from originally more of a product-based relationship to one which now very much encompasses services and teacher training. We'll be hearing more about that later. And right now we are most certainly building our future together with UVM, mutual support and development, professional development, of course, and the program that you'll be hearing all about today. I would say that UVM were pioneers in blended learning, and when the pandemic hit, they were in a very strong position already ready. On a personal note, I'd just like to say how nice it is to welcome Ale and Ricardo. My very last trip abroad was to Mexico about this time last year, and it was such a pleasure to see them there. So wonderful to be virtually reunited for this session. And without further ado, I will leave the floor to them both. Thank you very much, Ale and Ricardo.
Thank you very much, Phil. Thank you. And thank you, Ale. Welcome to a session. And it's really great to be here with you. I'm going to start sharing my screen with you all. Excellent. Can you see it? Welcome, Ale. Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
It's really good to see you here. Ready?
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. It's really, we've come a long way together in many different things, right? So it's great to be in 2021, an extraordinary year. I can anticipate, and it's really great to be here in this session. So why don't we give a little bit of what we will be doing in today's session. We will be talking about implementing a blended learning program, and we're going to go into the context of the program that has been enrolled in the past in the past 12 months, I would say. And we will talk a little bit about the context of UVM, the global context in regards to using a blended learning program, what drove to make some decisions in regards to the use of a new language program, and where are we now? Where are we in this relationship now? Where are we in the program implementation? And hopefully that we can share some interesting thoughts and insights to people who kindly agreed and is together with us today. So why don't we move a little bit and start talking, Ale? And I'm going to be asking you many questions because you are the head of the language program at UVM. You have been working with students in a very and teachers in a very close relationship for the past, well, not 12 months with this program, but with for many years. So uh, giving a little bit of a context in regards to blended learning before COVID, um, I would say that we had some institutions in general. I don't want to generalize, but just to give a bit of a panorama here, institutions really keen on implemented blended learning programs, at least not for language learning cases. They were more in relation to other subjects, perhaps, but in general terms, they were not really very deep into implementing a blended learning program, which is what makes it interesting in regards to the decision that UVM made for implementation of a program. And also teachers before a pandemic, before COVID, uh, distance education and remote teaching were not necessarily the main drivers of the instruction. So there was not this general idea or welcoming perception of blended learning. So what's interesting is that before COVID and before all this pandemic scenario, UVM had something in mind. UVM had already thought about shifting into a new program, shifting into the idea of having a real blended learning program. And I think that's really interesting, Ale. So for starters, why don't you give us a brief panorama on UVM and the background institution?
Sure, Ricardo, thank you. I mean, Universidad del Valle de Mexico, or UVM, we are mostly recognized by UVM, has been 60 years as part of the private education in Mexico. We have 32 campuses, and the language department has around 500 teachers, 36 full-time teachers. We have 31 language coordinators, and around 50,000 students enrolled in some language program. Currently, for the undergraduate program, we are working with 2 foreign languages, which are English and French. I think that will sum up a little bit of what we look like.
And the size and the number of people involved in a program. So I'm sure that for people who are here with us today, you can imagine the magnitude of implementing a new program and taking the risk and taking the challenges. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the teaching learning context at UVM before this new program came to place?
Yes, I mean, I think it's important to mention that before we implemented or that we changed to Touchstone, we have been working with different materials from different publishing houses. And most of the training and support that we had was only product training. We didn't have like a strong language policy or standards to follow and guide students, teachers, and coordinators to an exit profile of our students once they finish or they complete the language program. So it was until UVM became part of Laureate Universities that we had a more structured panorama to focus on. Okay, and well, we had been working with the same program for 10 years, and it was until 2020. Well, we began changing in 2019, and we implemented this new program in 2020. We decided to work with the CLMS after checking different platforms, and right now we are working with Touchstone Online.
And you mentioned that in all these years, there were some inconsistencies in regards to the achieving of goals in the program, right? So there were some aspects that, although the program was moving, in general, you could say that you were not reaching the institutional objectives. Is that the case?
Well, it's because there were not clear objectives. So
Okay.
I mean, although we were doing our best with the different elements that we had in place, I mean, there was not a very concrete objective or a very clear exit profile for our students that could help teachers and coordinators guide or structure the lessons towards the same objective. So yes, I think that that's one clear difference from before and now.
So it was difficult for you to measure outcomes, to identify where you were as an organization in regards to achieving goals or setting specific clear objectives, right? It must have been difficult back in the day, right?
It was a little bit difficult. Yes, it was until we began having more structure that we measured our, for example, the exit level of students. And well, we had very nice surprises.
Right. So it was uneven all along the way, right? You couldn't really tell exactly how it.
Yeah, it
right.
was a little bit uneven, but not that bad, as many people will assume.
Okay, all right. And I think if some of the people who are joining in today's session may understand that, right? That you would really want to have things in place, but at times you are not able to measure. And considering 32 schools, 32 campuses with many teachers and students, it must have been a problem. So why did UVM decide to look at a blended learning program as a solution for that?
So I think that the main reason was to align also the language program to what our institutional mission is, that it's to prepare global citizens that will be successful in a professional environment. So taking that into consideration, we decided that the blended program would help us frame the conditions of providing students with better communicative with a better communicative context while having face-to-face lessons. And of course, having that into consideration, we were also aligning the language program to what the mission of the institution is. And of course, having that placed, it would help us also standardize a little bit what the outcome of the program would be, regardless the campus you were studying as a student.
Okay, so it was not that you woke up one day and told your team, hey, let's move into a blended learning program. How about that?
No. Making that decision was part of lots of discussions with different stakeholders. I mean, of course, I have a wonderful team as part of the corporate DGI team, and they were really supportive about all the ideas, but that doesn't mean that it was the one idea that came out. I mean, we all had different ideas, different approaches, different things coming into our heads, and we really brainstormed a lot before we presented the final decision, you know?
And,
I mean,
and I'm sure that in those conversations, it came up that there were risks that you needed to take. Of course, advantages, but also some disadvantages. Would you like to mention a few of these risks, advantages, and disadvantages?
I think that the main risk that we took, that we had to take into consideration, was that our students and our campuses are from different they are immersed in different backgrounds. I mean, campuses, not all of them have the same technology or the same structure, to mention it. And also not all of our students have full access, for example, to internet or things like that, because they live far away from campus and they have to commute, etc. They use the materials in campus. And well, that was one of the risks. And now that with the pandemic, that was also one of the challenges that we had to face. And also one of the advantages was that we were going to help learners to foster some kind of autonomy while working with the program. And I think that also is a disadvantage, because in Mexico, students are not used to being autonomous when studying or learning has to be done. So we don't have those skills. So of course that was also a disadvantage.
So it's something that needs to be constantly improved and constantly encouraged across all the actors or the agents participating.
Yes, and also you need lots of follow-up so that that students really commit.
Okay, so from the conversations we have had, we can identify that there are some drivers for this decision making. One is to provide students with better opportunities for learning. Yes, so they can really become a useful, a proficient users of a language. Yeah, you also needed to optimize the face-to-face time. Based on the conversations, based on discussions that we had. And I'm sure many of the participants in this session will agree that at times it is difficult for a teacher inside a classroom to successfully deliver a class where there is limited time and where there is limited time for practice. And they really struggle with that. So I identified that one of the main reasons why you decided to go for a blended learning program is that the face-to-face time that you would have with your students or a teacher would have with students would be devoted to communicative activities and to help students develop a communication and communicative skills. We will talk a little bit about that, but you would say that these are the main drivers for this decision making?
Yes, and as it's mentioned also in the slide, I think that the program standardization was also a key element from this.
Okay.
For this
All right.
decision.
Okay. Now, you named the program BUS, and I remember the time in which you came, that we started working together, and you say, okay, we have this new program, and we will call it BUS.
I can't hear you, Ricardo.
About BUS. Tell us about BUS. What is BUS, Ale?
Oh, okay. Well, BUS stands for Blended Undergraduate Strategy. And the main reason that we called the program this way is because we really want everybody to identify that this was going to be a new way of working for the languages department at UVM. We want everybody to recognize it and everybody to remember that every time we talked about BOS 2020, because that was the year in which we implemented, I mean, they will remember that was the new way of working for languages, and they will not confuse it with other programs or with other ways of working. So yes, that's why we call this the program this way, because we really wanted everybody to recognize and know what we were talking when we mentioned BOS.
Okay. And it aims to develop communication skills, right?
Yes,
from students.
Yes. The main objective of this program of BOS is really to help students develop communication. I mean, regardless mistakes and everything, but they really need to focus on communicative skills.
Okay, and that's really interesting because that's in conversations with many teachers, coordinators, heads of language departments in many institutions all across the region, all across Latin America. We identify that one of the main struggles is that it's really complicated for some students. They have the knowledge. I don't know if that's the case of students at UVM, or that was the case of students at UVM, that they had the knowledge, they knew the grammar, they knew the structure, the syntax and everything, but the moment they had to communicate, whether it was spoken language or written language, there was this block that wouldn't really allow them to do that. So you were aiming to tackle that down, to help them, to pave the road a little bit for them and to help them feel more confident. And you thought that the development of these communication skills was key to this.
Yes, I mean, what we were noticing before we implemented the program is that most of our classes were grammar based. The students were receiving lectures on different grammar topics. I mean, nothing I mean, that I'm not saying that that was wrong, but I mean, if we really want to align the language program to our mission, I mean, we really need to focus on a different aspect of a language, of the language skills. So that was speaking. So what we tried to do was to make the program help students develop more confidence so that they could speak in a freer way.
Okay. Now, let's go a little bit more in detail on what it means to have a blended learning program, and in this case, the approach that you chose to use the platform. I understand that your idea was to give students some autonomy in work, so they could work on their own outside of class, and then there is some class time which is dedicated. Tell us a little bit more about this approach, 40-60% blended approach that you have.
I think that when you are thinking about a blended program, you have to find and think which is the right percentage of the work that a student is going to be doing on their own and the work that is going to be provided by teachers, so that it's going to be in the classroom. So taking that into consideration, and I mean the disadvantages we talked about before, we thought that the right blend for UVM was for our students to do 40% of the time for focusing on the language program, to do it online. That means autonomous learning, and the other 60% should be done in the classroom focusing on communication. And that's when both parts will integrate. So an easy way to look at it is just with that chart.
Okay, so it's 1 hour online work. Okay, so why don't we move a little bit ahead, and perhaps we can give them a wider panorama and a clearer picture on how this works in reality. So from what you mentioned, the first part of the class, the first hour of the class is online work in the CLMS using Touchstone Online. It's not the workbook, it's the Touchstone Online program, right? And there's a certain content that the students need to cover in that hour, right? You decide because of you and your team decided which is the core content that they will have to cover. Then tell us about the second part, the face-to-face. Well, it's virtual now, but that face-to-face aspect, how does that work?
Well, the face-to-face, it's going to integrate into a communicative environment what the student had been working previously. I mean, if one of our students is a little bit behind, I mean, when the time of this face-to-face lesson comes, he won't be able to succeed, or he will be struggling a lot to achieve the communicative objective for the lesson, because he wouldn't have prepared himself with the input necessary to be able to handle the communicative work during that 1 hour and a half. Right now, of course, it's online, but because of the different elements that we have created for the program, it's a little bit easier for teachers to continue focusing on the communicative objective. Then they will go back.
All right. They will go back to the 1 hour online work, right? Which is again in the LMS, where they would be able to work on receptive skills, some listening, some reading, and all, but also in productive skills, right? There would be some writing.
Yes.
You and I have had this conversation before. Sometimes writing is kind of the underrated skill, right? That teachers sometimes, programs consider that writing will magically appear at some point, but it's part of a process. So there has to be this consistent work in the platform, autonomous instruction and learning, and then they would be able to develop those skills, and then they go back into the class, the face-to-face experience again. What happens there?
They will continue working with communication. I mean, communication doesn't happen only orally. You can also have some written communication. So we try to find the right balance. And I think that's also one of the challenges that we have had while writing down this program, is to find the right balance between the speaking and writing as output skills. And of course, the platform will help us with listening and reading. So I think that finding the right balance between core and elective activities was also a challenge.
So teachers also have the access to the data that from students' outcomes when they work in the platform. and they can identify tendencies, who's doing better, who would need more support, and they can address that in the live sessions they would have with their students.
Exactly. I mean, teachers will have access all the time to the different data that there is in the platform. And I think that's one of the advantages of the platform, that it really provides you with clear information about how students are performing within the CLMS.
Okay. Now, it's not all bread and butter, and it's not all that easy, right? That there are some challenges that it faced. We've discussed that teachers would really need to go in through a rigorous induction process. Not that
Yes.
you would tell teachers, okay, here's your new program. You start on Monday. Thank you. See you in a month. Absolutely not, right? There has to be this induction process so they really understand what this program is about. That also includes coordinators, of course, for each campus. um, there has to be a different profile in teachers, isn't it? I mean, it's not a program that, I mean, it's easy to implement, but teachers need to have certain skills and qualifications to do that. And also that attitude towards implementing a program. Yeah. So they don't see it's like, here we go again. And then this is another program, but I will continue doing whatever I feel that works. But they will really need to align into that. And also for students, I think there's a challenge. You've mentioned before that for learners, they come from different backgrounds. So they are not at the same level, and they have different skills and objectives as well, and ways to learn. So it might be difficult to put them all together into the same umbrella for a course. There's this reluctancy also from students sometimes to commit to a program, not this program, but any program at times, right? They feel like the role is less active, more passive sometimes, and you really need to keep the ball rolling all the time. And this sense of disengagement, no, like this is not learning, is not necessarily something that I want to be part of. So there, agree with this.
Sorry, Ricardo, I couldn't hear you for the last part. I don't know if you can hear me okay.
Okay, that's okay. No, I was just saying that these are some of the challenges that you face, right?
Definitely. I mean, I think that teachers and students are the main stakeholders of any language program. And I think for both of them, their role within the program has to be very clear. So the only way in which you can do that is with having very good communication with everyone.
Okay. And that takes us to the program implementation, right? There are different stages. Tell us a little bit about the stages, because it didn't really go on like, okay, let's implement a program and let's just roll it out. There are different stages. Tell us about the initial stage, Ale, please.
Well, the first thing that we did was to have a very clear idea of what we wanted to obtain with the new program. Then we also analyzed like different instruments that would help us to achieve that objective. You decide obviously on the product. In this case, we thought that the product that would help us really to achieve our goal was working with the CLMS and keep on working also with Touchstone in an online version, because in that way, I mean, we also have to think of students that were not originally part of BOSS, but that they were integrating as the previous program has been phasing out. So that was also going to give us a little bit more of a stability. And also we thought about the different instruments that all stakeholders will need to receive. So we thought about teachers, we thought about coordinators, we thought about students. And also I think that finding the right blend, I mean, in our case, that was this 40% online and 60% face-to-face. I think that's also really important, because the students, I mean, most of our students, especially in Mexico, they will feel just like left there free to do whatever they want if they don't have like very strict way of following up, or if they don't have
Okay.
a teacher telling them if they are doing well, if they are not doing so well, etc., etc. So also
Okay.
that's also part of the blend.
Okay, that's really interesting. So first you had to have all the components you needed, identify the best program that would suit your objectives, find the right blend, and then moving on into perhaps communicating everything to all actors in this, and all agents in this equation. So
Yes,
you
yes. As I was telling you, I think communication is basic, especially when so many stakeholders are involved. I mean, you really need to get them also on board with you. So we created materials for teachers, I mean, for students, where we tried to, in a very easy way, tell them what they needed to do and who they need to approach in case of doubts. We also created lesson plans for teachers so that they can have a very clear guide of what the objective of every lesson was going to be, with suggested activities that they could modify, of course. I mean, every time that they won't deviate from our main objective. Okay, the CLMS, where obviously the core and elective activities are there already selected in templates for teachers and coordinators to follow. And of course, I think to communicate stakeholders the role that they have within the program is basic. If they don't understand their role, I think they will not understand what they have to do.
Okay, so these stages that you mentioned include extensive induction, a program for everyone, teachers, mainly coordinators as well, coordinators working on how to implement BOSS 2020, teachers learn how to teach with, because you mentioned that there are differences, and students to grasp and to say, well, this is BOSS and this is your program, this is what's going to make you successful, this is going to help you succeed in life. Now tell us, let's go back to January 2020, and let's go back to that the very day that you were to launch the program, that all campuses and all schools and teachers and students were ready to implement the program. Everything was fireworks and everything was like happy and glory, and here's the champagne and everything. And that was the most beautiful day on earth. Is that what really happened?
Of course not. Of course not.
Why not? So what happened then?
Well, we were ready. Everything was in the correct place. But for example, the very first day or one day before our due date, many teachers decided not to work with us, and they were teachers that we had already prepared and that we have already trained. So, I mean, that was the problem, because we had to place new teachers that hadn't received such like a proper induction to this new program. Okay. When we began observing some of the lessons, we could notice that many of the teachers were still giving grammar-based lessons, because most of the students were not really doing the online activities before the class. So and so teachers, of course, because we are teachers, they felt the need of still explaining students what the topics they were supposed to work on their own. So that's one of the main challenges that this kickoff faced. I mean, not having very clear for students what they had to do before the class, and teachers going back to the same old teaching.
So you realize that even though there were these huge efforts of communication, including all stakeholders, there were still gaps, right? So it was not a time for you and your team to say, hey, let's go on holidays and the program will roll on by itself. You still needed to go in there, doing some follow-up, doing some class observation.
Yes. I mean, yes, we had to do lots of follow-up. I mean, class observation, I think it's always going to help us to see whether what we wanted is, or what we aimed is really happening or not. We had some feedback sessions together with coordinators and teachers. We have had different trainings regarding the needs. One, the needs that we detected because of class observations. And of course, we are constantly working together with Cambridge on the adjustment in the lesson plans. So yes.
Okay. So there are more stages than that, right? So it's not just like roll over the program and that's it. But now there have been some outcomes so far. We are like 1 year after that January implementation in 2020. And you and I were talking a little bit about what's going on, what are the outcomes so far. And these are some numbers that you mentioned, and these are some this is some information that you could gather from your data. Tell us a little bit about what's going on.
So I think that one of our nicest surprises is that when we were observing classes, we could see that, I mean, of course, we were only observing level 1 classes when we implemented the program. And
right.
they are students working with Touchstone Online level 1. And with this BOSS lesson planning and everything, you could see that they could really express different ideas more easily than students that were working in the previous program, for example, with Touchstone 3.
Okay.
So you could really see that students were communicating. They were making mistakes, yes, but they were getting a message and they were passing on one. So I think that that's really one of our best surprises, because we could see that what we wanted to happen was happening. I mean, in some ways more than in others, but it was happening. And another is that little by little, we have seen that students are a little bit more committed to working with the CLMS. So for example, right now, 90% of our students are already enrolled and working with the CLMS. I mean, in the previous term, by the same week, we had less than 50% of the students working and enrolled in the CLMS.
Okay, so you could say that now the program is in place, and one of the nice, not surprises, because you were expecting that, is to see that students are more confident, that they, even though they are in initial stages, they feel more confident, and that motivates them to continue their students notice that also, right? And I think that's what every institution would want, that students feel that they are really learning because they can apply and they can communicate.
Exactly.
Now, I'm aware of time, and we're getting close to. There are still some actions that need to take place. We will finish the program implementation in February next year. By 2020, you would say that all students that are in UVM, in the undergraduate programs, are part of the BOSS program. So it's still 1 year, but you're halfway through it. The language signature is now part of the language curricula at UVM. So tell us about that. So language, English is now an official subject.
Yes.
In the program.
I mean, before this this new term, the one that we began in February, I mean, English was just a requirement for students to graduate, but it wouldn't give them any credit. Right now, it's part of their curricula, and it will give them it's part also of the credits they need to complete before graduating. So I think that's one very important change.
Okay.
At UVM.
All right, so it counts now for students' credits, right? I'm just gonna really briefly mention that we're currently working on an impact study with the Cambridge Research Department, in which we're collecting data from students' outcomes, from surveys. This data is analyzed as to identify what people are saying from all stakeholders, from coordinators, from teachers, from students, because we want to have the look and feel and to identify tendencies, to identify with numbers and with data what has gone on in this year, and to understand it, and if necessary to have the well, not if necessary, there's the program evaluation. The program needs to be constantly evaluated. The outcomes need to be analyzed, how students are outcoming, and what they are producing, and if it's aligned to what's expected, and obviously to make adjustments, right? No program is perfect, but I'm sure that you identify that adjustments need to be made, and this will take place. But the good thing is that there is all this data and all this information that would help you make the best possible decisions. Why don't we, in a minute, talk about these key drivers to a successful programming implementation? Um, from what you mentioned, we say that all agents need to be engaged and motivated. You mentioned everyone needs to understand the role in this program. How about this one, Ale?
I think that the thing that you have to have in mind all the time is which the objective of the program will be. And everybody needs to understand that and how they are part of that. So communicating the objective and what you are expecting of others to participate with you, I think it's very, very important.
And that sense of trust, right? That knowing that if people understand the roles, that's teams in schools, teachers, coordinators, and of course partners, that everyone doing the part of the job that they need to do would help you achieve goals. How about this?
I think that working with a team and having this collaborative way of working is vital. I mean, it's not something that you can do on your own. I mean, not one person can be working on producing everything alone. So you need to have people, a very strong team, very strong partners, like the one we have, and very, very strong also people that you can communicate, rely on, and feel that they are really going to pass on the correct instructions.
Be consistent with all the policies and all the ideas and everything, all the work that is put together, right? So there has to be this consistency all across the way. About flexibility?
I mean, you can plan as much as you can. And I think that will give your team and everybody involved the right way to follow. But of course, you are going to face different difficulties. I mean, time frame will not be as you were planning to. And I think that you have to be open for facing these challenges and being very flexible and also being very, very creative.
And have that capacity to adapt, right? Okay. All right. You're in mute, Ali. And have faith and patience, right? It's a leap of faith, and you really need to be patient because it requires from a lot of work. A few final thoughts, Ale, before we close the session. I have one more question to ask you, but how about this? This has been an extraordinary year that demanded extraordinary actions, and these actions are the ones that I think the and the implementation of a program came in very good time, right? We planned all this in 2019, and we launched the program together. You launched the program in 2020, just before the world moved into blended, into
Yes.
online, into, so the timing was always right. Any other final thought, Ale?
Yes, I think that if we hadn't had like such a clear program objective and this daily communicative objectives and the suggested communicative activities working with the CLMS, probably it was, I mean, moving to 100% online environment would have been a little bit more complicated for us as an institution. But having all these strong ways of working put in place before we had to do all these movements, I think that's what is helping us not to deviate from the original objective of the program. So I think it really, this change came in a very good time.
Now I have just one question, Ale. Was it worth it?
It is. It is. I mean, we have been working a lot, and but once you see the results in the students, then everything is absolutely worth it.
So a piece of advice would be for participants is that if you are hesitant about working on a blended learning or shifted into a more blended oriented program, why not? Why not take that risk and challenge, right?
Definitely.
All right, Ale, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm aware of time. I see that we have a few questions here. Phil, I think we still have some time for a few questions.
We do, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ale and Ricardo, for that wonderfully vivid picture you painted of the journey that you've been on. I think it makes an extraordinarily strong case study in terms of implemented blended learning, but I think it's also a great best practice study of how to implement any kind of change. So many thanks for sharing all of that rich experience with us. We're very, very grateful for you joining us. We do have a few questions in the chat, so we'll just move over to those. Anna, you've asked, are these 5 hours a week? Is that the pace of the classes?
Yes, it's a 5 hour a week.
Great, thank you. And another question from Anna. Thank you very much, Anna, for your questions. She asks, is the teacher available during the online hour, or do the students have to wait until the face-to-face time?
It's the online hour is asynchronous. I mean, it's autonomous learning. A student will be doing certain activities on their own.
Thank you, Ale. Alina has a question about the last year. She asks, has this strategy changed over the last year in face of the challenges of the pandemic?
Sorry,
the strategy?
Okay.
Sorry. Alina asks, has the strategy changed over the last year in the face of the challenges of the pandemic?
I think, yes, it changed. We adapted to an online, as we were mentioning, we adapted to an online environment, and we had to adapt the program to the new circumstances, but the main objective of the program, which is to develop communicative skills, has not changed.
Thank you. Another question from Anna. Thank you, Anna. Do you have a specific model teachers have to follow to deal with the students' challenges mentioned?
Well, we have, yes, we have a model for teachers, and we have adapted that same information for students to follow. So everybody will know what to do in the program, what is their role within the model. That's what we have been communicating to everybody. And that's one of the challenges that we have discovered right now. I mean, we have to be constantly reminding both teachers and students what their role within this blend is.
Thank you, Ale.
Okay.
Anna has one more question about assessment. Could you describe what assessment looks like? Is it through Touchstone, or do teachers create their own assessment?
No, the assessment is through Touchstone. I mean, especially because we really wanted to standardize the instruments of evaluation for students.
Thank you, Ale.
So that's the Touchstone online assessment, right?
Yes.
That is there within the platform. So students take, and that helps you for validation. And also that work that students do on a daily basis is also accounting for assessment. Is that correct, Ale?
Yes, Ricardo.
Super, so a mix of the two, thank you.
Sorry, Phil.
No worries, thank you. And we have a couple more questions coming in the chat. So do add your questions in the chat if you hadn't had a chance to yet, then no problem, just add them in now. Jose asks a very important question. How did you manage teacher stress?
We have been doing lots of training, teachers training. I mean, of course, having such a nationwide institution, it's complicated to go and visit campuses, especially right now. We can't do that. So we have done lots of teacher training. We have asked teachers how they feel with the program. So this is part of the feedback, and through observation also we have seen which are some areas that we need still to tackle. So, but everything that we have handled with the teachers has been through teachers training.
Thank you.
And also to add a little bit on what you mentioned, also in the sessions that we have had, we try to give teachers all the tools that they need, so they would feel at ease, they will feel confident, and they will feel comfortable. So that reduces also that stress and what it really brings not to have everything that they would need to properly implement a program. So we try to provide also that balance, and more actions are coming in the short term in those regards as well. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Ricardo. We have a question from Melissa. Melissa would like to know, how long did it take to train teachers to implement the program?
We began training teachers 6 months before we implemented the program, and we have training also before we start every term, so as to remind teachers of what we are expecting out of the program, what is the methodology that we want them to use while teaching. And also we are going to start as this month with some training so that they can still have in mind what the methodology, when their role is also is. So we are constantly training our teachers.
Yeah, and also, if I may add, it's part of the work that we do together. We have yearly training to all teachers in different stages. Also, not only in getting to know the products better, but also in professional development. We have actually, Ale, it's about time that we start planning the summer training, because that's part of a long venture we have, and we have constant training towards teacher development. So I would say that in response to that question, or to add a little bit more, it's ongoing. Yeah, there's the initial stage of training, but it's ongoing, and we constantly revisit what needs to be trained and what needs to be put in place, so teachers feel better at doing what they currently do very well.
Thank you. And we have one more question. This one's also from Melissa. She asks, where can we get information for teacher professional development on the program? Oh.
Oh, okay. That's the cue to the cue to that one. No, definitely. Well, in regards to how the program has worked with UVM, I think Ale Prado would be the next point of contact for those wanting to know a little bit more of the details and the insights. I'm sure Ale and her team are more than open to that. Right, Ale? I hope I'm not really putting you into a difficult situation here.
No, of course not. It will be our pleasure.
And in regards to all the initiatives and everything we do in Cambridge for professional development, well, I'm responsible for the team in Mexico and the actions that take place in Mexico and also across land. But I would say that if you drop us a line here, send us an email, I can point into the direction that would help you for professional development. We do have many instances in Cambridge that I'm sure would help for that, for professional development.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. Thank you, Ale. Thank you, everyone, for all of your questions. Very much appreciated. Thank you for joining us. And